All right. Hey, what's up, y'all? So today I want to talk about being a real foodie, considering yourself a real foodie, and why we talk so much about that. There's some really cool concepts that I've honed over the years and to help us understand what we're trying to do with this. And our argument is that real food is going to be better for you than eating not real food and isolated, fractionated versions or components of real food, because real food is understood by the body in a different way than those isolated, fractionated, dead components, okay, in most situations. So let's go through a couple of little concepts or arguments to help us understand this. So think about vitalism versus reductionism. We are vitalists, meaning that we believe in the power and the synergy of this whole complex thing, versus reductionism, which understands and tries to pick apart the concepts or the constituents or the components of that thing. So just as an example, this is really fascinating. So vitamin C was discovered, I don't know what the year it was discovered, but it was discovered back in like the, 14, 15, 1600s. So what happened is, we had these long ship voyages and people would die of some kind of weird disease. And over time they figured out it was this disease and they called it scurvy. And I think I remember reading about Magellan on his explorations. He had this one, long ship voyage. By the way, scurvy takes, if you go with little to no vitamin C over 30 days, you start to develop noticeable symptoms. So they would go on these really long ship voyages, and Magellan lost 200 out of 300 something people died to vitamin C deficiency, which they didn't know that's what it was at the time. It was just, I don't even know if they called it scurvy at the time, but that's what it was. And so over time, of course, through what we would call ancestral wisdom, we started to figure out that when we ate these certain foods, we would not get this disease that would kill everybody. And we figured out that citrusy foods did that, lemons and limes and oranges and things. And then at some point, someone got interested in what was it about that lemon or lime or orange that would keep people from getting this disease. And so that's reductionism. Reductionism tries to figure out what is it about this thing that makes it work. And then, I think maybe that's beneficial on a lot of levels. It's what makes us such an advanced species in society, is that we have this very scientific way of looking at things. We want to pick it apart and we want to understand it and learn it. So at some point, we figured out that there's this little, nutrient, and we named it vitamin C, and it's the thing that contributes to people not developing scurvy. And it's one of the most important vitamins that we can consume. And of course, it does a lot more things inside the body, but that's how we discovered it, okay? So reductionism would boil an orange down or a lemon or lime down to vitamin C and say vitamin C is what's most important about that. And then the problem with that is, I think that's beneficial for sure to have that kind of mindset and thinking. But then the problem with that is that we extract that one nutrient and then we try to sell that by itself as some kind of a fix or panacea, whereas we understand as real foodies and vitalists that there's so much more to an orange or a lemon or a lime than just vitamin C. There's everything that Mother Nature packaged together in that food that the body understands and resonates with. Yes, I can benefit from some isolated vitamin C, and we even recommend people supplement with vitamin C in the context of eating real food, because when we're eating real food, we're getting the synergy of all that stuff happening with real food, and then some strategic supplementation in that context may make a little bit more sense. But that's why we don't recommend supplementation in the context of eating processed food, because we don't have that whole synergy thing going. But there's so much more to an orange or a lemon or lime than vitamin C. There's other vitamins, minerals, cofactors, coenzymes. There's a life force, there's a vitality to it. And if I consume something that I jive with from a living standpoint, it's like I absorb that livingness. It's like I want to jive with the things that make sense to me and that I resonate with and that I am like, okay? So, and we could take that to a lot of different examples, but in general, I just want to say, real food has vitality and life force. We are vital and living. And so when we consume real food, we're getting vital and living things. And so we resonate with that. Real food has nutrients that are already balanced in the macros. So we're always all concerned about getting specific nutrients and making sure that we're getting certain amounts and the balance of these things. When you eat real food and the balance of different real foods, you're getting a bunch of nutrients packaged together in a way that the body understands. We get what we call nutrient synergy, meaning that these nutrients interact with each other in a way that the body understands, and it helps us absorb nutrients. So when I consume vitamin C in the context of an orange, I'm getting all these different bioflavonoids and cofactors that help me assimilate vitamin C to the max versus me taking an isolated version of vitamin C. And then we get what we call food synergy, which is as we eat real food and a balance of different real foods, we start to balance out our macros. We start to get a lot of broad spectrum of nutrients. And so we're mitigating the possibility of running into nutritional deficiencies. And by definition, real food is way less toxic than some product or something that's been created or developed. And of course, as we're eating real food, we're trying to nurture this concept of self-sufficiency. So let's just go through some examples. You know, whey protein powder is an isolated, fractionated version of what can come out of milk, right? But if we're believers in the power of raw milk and the synergy of raw milk, which, by the way, I think raw milk is great if you have access to it and it's really good quality. We just don't have that here in Vegas, so we don't promote it that much. But dairy products in general, we're big fans of. But there's so much more to eating a steak or an egg or drinking a raw glass of milk from a grass-fed animal than there is to consuming whey protein powder, because whey protein powder is isolated, fractionated, it's shelf stable. Instead, I'm not saying that you're not getting some kind of benefit out of it, but it's way better to eat a steak or an egg or drink a glass of milk if you have access to raw milk that's good quality. And there's a big difference from consuming full-fat dairy products like cheeses and yogurts and creams than there is consuming whey protein powder, because whey is isolated, fractionated, and shelf stable. Right. And then, there's a lot of talk around fiber and consuming fiber and fiber supplements and Fiber One bars. Why do we think fiber is so important? Well, one of the arguments is because we know that eating fruits and vegetables is healthy. And someone deduced that, okay, what is it about fruit and vegetables that they all have in common? Well, they all have fiber in common. So therefore, fiber must be the thing that makes fruits and vegetables healthy. And that's flawed logic, right? There's so much more to fruits and vegetables. What makes a fruit and vegetable healthy? The fruit and vegetable. It's the whole thing, and it's probably something we're never going to fully understand, because it's that synergy and interaction of all the things contained in that piece of produce that make that so healthy for us. And then, if I look at something like some food products out there that have macro ratios, like proteins to fat to carbohydrates, we get caught up in, or sold on wanting to buy something that has those different macronutrient ratios listed out. And what's useful to understand is that it's better for me to eat a balanced meal than to have a product that has a balanced ratio of macronutrients. And by the way, the body does perfectly fine on mono meals. Like I can eat nothing but steak for a day or a week, and I'll be perfectly fine as long as I rotate onto something else and get balance over time. So there's not any necessary need to get specific balance in any given meal or any given day. I just need to have that balance over time. But my point with this whole vitalism versus reductionism concept is I don't want to be sold on a product that has macronutrients as one of its touted benefits, or a balance of these macronutrients. I just want to eat a balance of real food, because I'm getting way more than a balance of macronutrients. I'm getting all the things that Mother Nature packaged in that food. Omega-3s and DHA and EPA are a hot topic, even in mainstream news circles right now. So we see all kinds of food products and fish sticks that have omega-3 symbols on it. And, we truly believe that if you want to get omega-3 from a natural source, you need to consume the real foods that contain it, like fatty fish, like wild-caught salmon. There's a big difference from consuming wild-caught salmon versus a fish stick that supposedly has omega-3s in it, right? And then we've already mentioned orange before, but again, there's a big difference in consuming an orange versus pasteurized, shelf-stable orange juice, right? So again, vital, living, synergistic, the synergy of the life force. It's not pasteurized, it's not dead. There's just something about that real food component that the body fully understands. And if you really want to be holistic, you can start to look at everything as a real foodie, right? What's the best way for me to get caffeine? Is it taking a caffeine pill or a pre-workout powder? No, it's probably drinking something like coffee or tea, because then it's packaged with a bunch of other bioflavonoids, flavonoids, and polyphenols, and it makes it much more healthy. All right, and then we look at sugar. I mean, isolated sugar is such a problem for this modern world. And you think about, where did sugar come from naturally? Fruits and vegetables, maybe mainly fruit and some honey. And when you eat fruit, when you consume honey, like there's so many other things packaged in with that food. it almost mitigates the potential damage that we're getting from consuming sugar, right? So that is our vitalism versus reductionism concept. And the big takeaway from that is we want to be real foodies. We want to think of ourselves as vitalists. Just because it's at Whole Foods doesn't mean it's good for you. Just because it's gluten-free doesn't mean it's good for you, because if it's processed, it's processed, and we probably want to stay away from it. So as I'm assessing food, I want to think in terms of vitalism versus reductionism. Is this something that contains the nutrients that I'm looking for in a real food form? And I always want to focus on maximizing nutrients. And ideally, I want to seek out the majority of my foods that are perishable, meaning that that food has the potential to go bad. That's actually a really good thing. If something's perishable, that means other organisms see value in it, which means that I could see value in it. I just want to get that value before other organisms get the value out of it. You know what I mean? So perishable is a good thing, whereas shelf stable, we have to proceed with caution. Shelf stable means it's protected in some way. And that doesn't mean that everything that's shelf stable or bottled or canned or packaged is off limits, but we just want to have this thought process around this. Vitalism versus reductionism, seeking out maximum nutrients, seeking out foods that are perishable, which is a really good thing. And then we always want to consider food quality, because the better the quality, the more the nutrients, the less the toxins. And we're talking about things like upgrading to organic and grass-fed and pasture-raised and things like that, all right? So again, to bring that all back around, vitalism versus reductionism means that we see a value in real food because of the vitality and life force, because it has a perfect amount of nutrients that are perfectly balanced. We have nutrient synergy that interacts with each other that makes it easier to absorb and digest. My body understands that, it resonates with it. And then over time, if we're eating a balance of different real foods, we're getting a balance of different macronutrients. And so all that stuff tends to work itself out, right? So when we're eating real food for this body, we're eating for nutrients to build this body, contribute to form and structure. That majority of those nutrients need to come from real food. And we're also eating a way that nurtures self-sufficiency, metabolic flexibility, and fat burning. That's where we come with our rules about moderating and being strategic with our carbohydrate consumption, all right? So to finish this off, let's just talk about all the different approved items that we have out there. So in the SHT community, of course, we have access to foods that are made with the right ingredients that otherwise might be considered toxic. So if I have this addiction to Lay's potato chips or something, well, you know, potatoes are a safe starch. They're in our definition of real food, but the problem with most potato chips out there is they're cooked in the wrong oils and have a bunch of other toxic ingredients and preservatives. So part of what we do in the SHT is give people options that they can choose that are made with better ingredients so they're less toxic, but they're still processed. They're still not optimal. They're still not vital. And so we want to think in terms of being a real foodie. So yes, if I want to, on a special occasion, get some Jackson's Honest potato chips cooked in coconut oil, or some Siete cassava chips cooked in avocado oil, and I want to use those for a party and a dip-in chip with some avocado or guacamole, that's perfectly fine on occasion, but it's probably not serving my long-term goals. And the reality is most of us probably don't have the self-control to buy a bag of Siete chips and keep it at home and not go through the whole thing or most of the thing in one sitting. You know, we have access to gluten-free pizzas, and not all gluten-free pizzas are created equal. So we did an experiment a few years ago where we went out and sampled all the different pizzas in Las Vegas. And there's some pizzas that are just completely legit, made with the right ingredients, low carb. Some are not low carb, some are kind of starchy, but then some have toxic oils in it. So within the realm of the appropriate ones, gluten-free pizzas may be fine on occasion, but again, we're kind of moving in that direction of a little bit too processed, a little bit too close, resembles too much of the things that we're trying to avoid in the first place, and we want to think of ourselves as real foodies. And also things like, you know, dark peanut butter chocolate cups, you know, like Reese's cups made with dark chocolate, sun butter, peanut butter, almond butter. There's ice creams out there that are made with the right ingredients. There's holistic versions of all these things that might be considered no-nos. But again, in general, if I'm consuming these things on a regular basis, I'm probably not serving my long-term goals. And so I want to think about myself as a real foodie. If I want dessert, special occasion, getting some Strauss ice cream is fine. But in general, the majority of my desserts need to be fresh, real fruit. Okay. So, you know, in our progressions and in our guide, I have a couple pages where we talk about moderation guidelines and how much to consume of what and how often. And so when it comes to the most nutrient dense of the foods, things like animal meats, healthy traditional fats, nutrient dense vegetables, and even full fat dairy products, we'd say that you don't need to moderate those things at all because they are appetite auto-regulating because they're very satiating. So over time, the more of these nutrient-dense foods that I consume, the more nutritionally sufficient I become, and the more my body gets what it needs, and it starts to give me these signals of I'm good to go, I don't need anything else because you're giving me everything that I need. And it works itself out, it really does. So there's things that are okay to eat on a regular basis that do need to be moderated. And so this would be our moderated category, and this would be things like our safe starches and our fruits, mainly our dominant carbohydrate sources, because we do think that there's a problem with eating too much of that stuff. It's great to have most days, but we want to measure the amounts out, and then we also want to time those later in the day because we're trying to nurture fat burning throughout the majority of the first part of the day. Nuts and seeds, I don't think people need to be going crazy on those. I think nuts and seeds are really hard for most people to digest, so we recommend moderating those to about a handful per day. A Costco container of freaking roasted macadamia nuts is probably way too much, right? But a handful of nuts and seeds in the context of eating meats and traditional fats and some nutrient-dense vegetables is awesome. Some low sugar dark chocolate most days is perfectly fine. And then also having an alcoholic drink most days, one drink most days is going to be perfectly fine. But then when we get to the things that we would consider approved and relatively highly processed, even though they're made with the right ingredients, those things need to be turned to only on occasion. All right, so we're talking about things like the gluten-free pizzas and the ice creams and the really sweet dark chocolates and the eating out, all-you-can-eat buffet, sushi, sushi roll things, sweet drinks, alcoholic drinks, more than one alcohol drink, really sweet desserts, the candies and cookies and all the chips and pastas and things made with the right ingredients. Those things are not going to serve our goals over the long term. We want to think about ourselves as real foodies and only turn to those things on special occasions, okay? So some really good discussions we had in one of our group meetings here recently is just some fine tuning of this and some questions that we had. So really what we're thinking about is what's optimal, right? There's things that are processed or packaged, shelf stable, that are still within this realm of optimal to eat on a regular basis. So I would say things like pork rinds, like the Epic brand. It's pork skin and cooked in its own fat. We think that's nutrient dense and it's great. It's a perfect snack. You can't really overeat those things too much. Epic meat bars, beef jerky, bacon, meat snacks, and even those low sugar dark chocolates are fine on a regular basis. Now, versus our approved items, all the things that we just talked about, these things tend to be carbohydrate based and easy to overdo, relatively overly processed versus some of those other things that we just mentioned, okay? So, big takeaway, because I've come up with several big takeaways so far. Big takeaway from this whole thing is we want to think of ourselves as real foodies. Why do we want to think of ourselves as real foodies? Because it's what's best for us. We're going to feel better. We're going to have better body composition. We're going to have better performance as an athlete. We're going to have better health markers over the long term because the body resonates with real food and everything that's contained in real food way better than it resonates with isolated, fractionated components of real food and things that have been heavily processed, and especially those really carbohydrate-rich foods. That doesn't mean that we can't strategically supplement a real food way of eating with things that we know we might be deficient in, but the majority of the nutrients that we get need to come from real food. I think that's everything that I wanted to say about that, all right? So going forward, only turn to those approved options on rare occasions, special occasions, and make the majority of your food coming from real food because it's gonna make you feel a hell of a lot better, all right? Thank you all so much for listening.